G'day, ZiggyD here with another Diablo 3 guide. In this video I want to explain to you guys how to know where to put your Paragon Point bonuses. It sort of struck me today when I was talking to a friend that this is actually something that's not immediately obvious all of the time. It actually takes a fair bit of thought about your gearing situation and your build to actually know where is the best spot to put each of these points. You know, some of them are a little bit obvious, but other ones require a little bit more finesse in terms of understanding your character's situation. So let's just jump straight into it. First up, I'll be doing this on the Demon Hunter, so there'll be some core differences like dexterity and hatred and things like that. But for the most part, you should be able to translate anything I say in regards to my character to every other thing. And the Demon Hunter is also a nice class to be as a template because it can it has multiple different options in the way it can spec the Paragon points that all work pretty effectively. So I can use some examples that'll probably help you guys out, even if you're playing a barb or monk or something else. So, first up we have Dex and Vitality, your main stats. Now these I highly recommend leaving for now until you understand whether you have enough or you've maxed out the amount of hatred or resource or move speed. So what we want to do is we want to look at these bottom two before we start looking at Dex and Vit. So let's talk about move speed first. There's a few different things you can do with move speed. Firstly, the move speed from Paragon points and gear total together to reach the cap of 25%. 25% is still the hard cap from gear plus Paragon points. So we only want to get that to 25%. No point getting anything extra. So if you have two pieces of gear that give you 12% move speed, like myself, I have Natalia's here and Inna's Temperance, which give me both 12% each. That brings me to 24%. The maximum number I need from Paragon is only 1%. So that's pretty obvious. You have another option, however, with the move speed. It's very worthwhile if you if you have the opportunity to drop move speed from your boots and get another main or core stat in its place to actually, under the new system, especially where the main stats roll much higher, to get your 12 to 13% move speed from one of your items in Paragon points instead. So you might not have that many points, but if you have enough points to get to 12 to 13%, then you can actually just consider dropping it from your boots, for example, and getting like Vitality in its place. If I had the option with a new pair of boots to have Vitality instead of move speed, I would consider doing that and would instead put Paragon points in my move speed to get it as close to cap as possible. Now, pretty much all builds, move speed is very important. The exceptions are builds that use something like Teleport on the Wizard, some other movement skill where movement speed isn't as important. But for the most part, every class wants move speed in Diablo. Getting between those packs really quickly is going to increase your efficiency overall. So try and get yourself to max however you can, whether that means spending more or less points in move speed. Just make sure you stay to that cap of 25% and don't sink any points exceeding that. So the next one is your resource. This very strongly depends on your build. If you're something that uses really bursty sort of skills, so for example on my Demon Hunter now I'm using Cluster Arrow, which costs a pretty significant amount of hatred. Getting a bit of extra hatred on there can help you reach a new breakpoint to be able to use your skill once more. So with a bit of hatred regen factored in, I'm able to get another hit out on my Cluster Arrow. If I get like one more point of hatred, I think I was one point of hatred off there of being able to burst it out. So I'm sinking my Paragon points in there. I could probably actually respec out of these for now and put it in when I can get a few more points in there. But I'll be able to reach a breakpoint pretty soon with my resource that'll allow me to use one more use of my skill. So simply calculate how much, just do a little bit of testing. That's the good thing about the Paragon system, you can test as much as you want. So from full I can go 1, 2, 3, and then I'm just a little bit off. So calculate how many off you are after that, and then think about whether you need to put any points in hatred. Okay, so after you've got these two sorted out, you can then go back to your main stat and Vitality. Now, stacking your main stat is the default option, so go with this if you're not sure if you need Vitality. Otherwise, go Vitality if you're a life stacking build. So if you're a character using percentage heals to heal yourself, and then it's probably a good choice to stack in Vitality, especially if you're going to be combining it with percentage life. So this character here would actually benefit from Vitality, but overall I think hatred and move speed, or your resource and move speed, are far more effective uses of points in the early stages than dexterity and vitality, so I tend to leave those in most of my builds. Next up we have offensive stats. Now we'll talk about attack speed first. Attack speed is only useful if attack speed is actually useful in your build. Although it can increase your sheet DPS by quite a bit, really think about whether it's actually useful for your build. So if you're using something like this one now, Cluster Arrow is a very high cost attack but does a lot of damage. So what we want to actually do, having moves more attack speed isn't actually going to make this more effective. It just means we're going to, get them out slightly quicker. What we actually want to do is maximize the damage each one of these deals. The only thing that attack speed does give us is the ability to regen a little bit faster by using our core attack. So with this one, you want to really consider in your build how much attack speed actually helps you, and ignore sheet DPS from the factor there. If you're using something that is just combined fast attacks though, then you might want to calculate it in terms of sheet DPS. And the easiest way to do this is just to simply reset your points here, and then test, say, okay, my sheet DPS is 182 right now. If I sink all my points into attack speed, I get to 186.8. I can then simply reset and go, okay, what about as compared to crit hit damage? 188. Okay, so I get, I get X amount for sinking it into crit damage, I get X amount for sinking it into attack speed, and whichever one's higher you can go with if your build can make use of attack speed. Now, I'll skip cooldown reduction for now and talk about crit chance and crit damage. These two go hand in hand, and most builds will benefit from crit chance and crit damage. There's very few builds that don't actually use these skills or these stats or get as much of them as possible. So what you want to do then is think about which one of these is actually going to give you the most benefit. There's sort of a ratio that where crit chance and crit damage sort of even out. Often it's like a factor of 10, so 40% crit chance is often good with like 350 to 400 crit damage, but you can actually test this again just by doing that same thing. So for example, let's look at my character without any Paragon points spent. I have 47.5% crit chance and 400 crit damage. So I think, okay, bringing my crit chance up could increase it to 50%. How much actual DPS is that going to give me? So let's have a look at my DPS with crit chance being spent. I get 2 extra crit chance. Brings me up to 187.2. Whereas compared to crit hit damage, because I already have pretty high crit chance, maybe actually stacking more damage when I do crit is going to be more effective for my build. And looking at the sheet DPS, we see that as well. And so going for the crit chance is probably better if you use something that procs off crit chance. Like if you have skills that benefit from crit chances from just getting crits, then that can be helpful. So for example, if I'm using like Hungering Arrow, Spray of Teeth, which procs on crit, then maybe you want to prioritize that crit chance a little bit if the DPS is pretty close. But otherwise, you just want to go for the one that's going to give you the highest sheet DPS total. So just simply test those two and see which one ends up with more, and nice and easy to play around with to sort of optimize those stats. Cooldown reduction is only useful if you're using a build, I think, with 2 to 3 cooldown skills. I consider that to be a heavy cooldown build, and that's only then useful if you're stacking this in addition to gear, because sinking how many points? 20 points into cooldown reduction gives you 4% cooldown reduction, not all that much. However, if you are stacking already like 30 to 40% on gear or something like that, then getting the extra on Paragon might sort of help you, squeeze a few extra seconds out there, which gets you a nice sort of rotation going with your cooldown build. It's really cool in 2.0 and Reaper of Souls. Cooldown builds are very viable now with the cooldown reduction stat, and getting it on like 2-3 pieces of gear plus your Paragon points can actually make a build that just wouldn't have worked before actually work. But if you're playing a heavy cooldown build, I consider that to be 2 to 3 cooldown skills, then you may want to consider cooldown reduction over everything else, because using those skills more often is going to be more effective than the marginal increase in DPS. For my character though, it all comes down to the crit damage. So next up, we have defense. I've talked about in previous videos the idea of mitigation versus max life. If you are a build that relies on percentage heals, so I'm talking things like smokescreen healing vapors, which regenerates 15% of your life, you'll get more scaling, more effectiveness out of this skill specifically by stacking more life. If you have vitality, percentage life is going to be very good. So percentage life multiplies out with your vitality to increase your life overall. If you are stacking a fair bit of vitality on your gear, then you'll actually get a lot of extra life from increasing your percentage life. It's like giving yourself a base life, and then the higher your base life is, the higher the percentage life is actually going to make a difference. It's going to make more of a difference. Now, this character actually doesn't have that much vit on its gear. I've got some there, don't really have any there. I've got a little tiny bit on my bow, don't really have any there, don't really have any there, have a little bit there. Not much vitality overall. So this is actually not that effective overall. I'd probably actually be better suited by resist all, but I'm just going with the life anyway to sort of test that out. Apparently, I haven't spent all my crit damage in here. Didn't accept it, apparently. But percent life, if you do have very high vitality, is going to be your biggest net gain, and especially if you're using those percentage heals. But if you're not using those percentage heals and instead relying on something like regeneration on life gain on hit, if those are the main ways you're trying to heal your character, so if you're something like a wizard that doesn't really have any percentage heal skills, then you may really want to stack either armor, resist all, or life regen. However, there's 3 options there, so which one actually becomes the best? Resist all is by default the most effective way to spend points. 5 all resist per point is very effective at increasing your character's toughness. And in fact, we can probably look at our toughness rating now, 469. Sinking that into 100 resist all through those points brings me up to 550. What was that? That was a huge difference, wasn't it? Let's actually have a look at that. 469 up to 550. Was that really that much? Wow, it's such a huge increase in toughness. So you can see that all resist is often the default, by default, the most effective stat there. However, if your character has a lot of armor, if you've gotten gear that has a lot of increased armor rolls, like for example these gloves have increased armor on them, if you have like say 3-4 pieces of gear with that on them, then the percentage armor one is going to scale your armor very well, just like I was talking about with life. So that may be the biggest increase for you. So let's talk about, well, 550 before with all resist. If I look at armor now, only 496, nowhere near as effective as the all resist for me. So default all resist is going to be most effective in terms of mitigation, unless you're stacking a lot of armor, and I don't have that much on my gear, but pay attention to your gearing situation. If you have a lot of armor, test that one, it may actually be better for you, but you can always just look at your actual toughness stat and compare these two. But that's pretty much the be-all end-all of that. However, life regeneration is the other option here, if your mitigation's already pretty decent. So let's take a look at our mitigation at the moment. I've got, what, 57% from that, and from my all resists, I've got, what, it's about 250 as average, 45%. If these were a bit higher, I think if 55 to 60% mitigation on both of these accounts, then life regen, sure, I could stack a bit more mitigation, but I'm actually going to get more effectiveness out of stacking life regen, as in terms of making my character tankier. You can actually get a fair amount of life regen. 660 for those points is a pretty significant amount. That's like more than what you'll get on a piece of gear for the most part. I don't think I've actually seen any life regen rolls on any of my current gear. But in general, you probably want to go for all resist. Default to that if you're unsure. Otherwise, if you're stacking a lot of armor, go for the armor. If you're stacking a lot of life and going for percentage heals, go for that. Otherwise, go for your life regen. So this is probably the most interesting tab overall, I think, and I'll go for all resist for now. Finally, utility. Utility is a pretty interesting one as well. If you are stacking a lot of like increased of your core main resource stat, then resource cost reduction is probably going to be very effective for you, especially if you can sort of test around a bit and see if stacking this increases helps you reach another breakpoint. So although you may not mathematically have enough hatred to use X amount of cluster arrows, if you stack a bit of resource cost reduction, cluster arrow is going to be a little bit cheaper than what the tooltip says, and you might be able to squeeze an extra one in there. So that's one you can just sort of test out that way. Life gain on hit is exactly the same as life regen. If you're stacking mitigation, if you have a highly mitigative character and you're getting some life regen, you may also want to consider life gain on hit. However, life gain on hit is much more effective if you are an attack speed stacking character, or if you have skills that proc life gain on hit a lot. So if you have things like caltrops on a demon hunter that deal damage, or something that's kind of hanging around like dot effects on a witch doctor, then life gain on hit will probably be very effective for you. Just think about the total number of hits your character's putting out. My character is not putting out that many hits. I'm doing a cluster over here and there, and some grenades, not hitting many mobs all that often. So life gain on hit is pretty rubbish for me, really pretty atrocious in terms of increased defensive capabilities. So resource cost reduction is good for me at the moment. Gold find's just an obvious one. If you want to find more gold, stack gold find. Area damage, however, is the final interesting one, and this is one a lot of people get confused at. A lot of people see this and see the name area damage and think, hold on, I use a lot of AoE skills. Even my grenades are AoE skills. I can actually get, how much can I get from this? I can get like 19% increased area damage. Holy crap, that's OP. That's like a huge increase. However, area damage does not function that way in Diablo 2. It's actually pretty misleading. If we actually apply it in here, what we can actually go into the details and see is area damage, and read the tooltip here. All attacks have a 20% chance to also deal 19% of the damage to enemies within 10 yards. So this is actually something that procs 1/5 of the time and applies an extra splash damage that's calculated off the base damage of that skill. So if I'm using a very powerful single target skill, so let's look at something like Impale, and I want to, for some reason, make an impale build that uses, turns my impale's high single target damage, so let's even go like Grievous Wounds, so very high total damage. I can instead turn this into a sort of pseudo AoE ability. And I have to say, I haven't really played around with splash damage enough to know of how actually effective it is, area damage, how effective it is. So far, my limited testing has been pretty lackluster, but I have heard of things like Barbs using Frenzy, stacking a lot of this on their gear and on the passive, on the Paragon points here, and seeing it to be pretty effective. But for the most part, I don't think area damage is all that effective, and it'll be one I encourage you to avoid unless you end up trying to go focus on a build that actually maximizes this, using single target skills that hit often and then deal high damage, so that you can kind of splash that damage around and turn those single target skills into AoE skills. But for the most part, you'll probably be either using life gain on hit or resource cost reduction. But if for whatever reason you don't really need either of those, then I guess area damage might be your other one to go for, unless you just happen to want more gold. But anyway, hopefully you guys found this helpful and can better plug those Paragon points into your build. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching.